event hosted by the Chamber of Deputies. So first of all, a big thank to the institution and specifically to the Forza Italia group that, as you probably understand by the setting, is today hosting us for this conference on a very topical subject. I think it's quite a timely conference to debate of transatlantic relations, not only because it's, in the news, frequently in the news in this period, but also because, more broadly speaking, the Western world, and not just the Western world, is passing through a moment of serious and deep transformation, geopolitical upheavals, but also deep change of our own society. So it has been really more evident the needing for a strong, reliable, and renewed partnership between the two shores of the Atlantic. Clearly, we all know that there have been some disagreements and some misunderstandings recently, most of them stemming from verbal excesses, fundamentally. You know what I'm referring to, so the question of the demands for annexation of Greenland, or some insensitive remarks on the contribution of the European militaries to the Afghanistan war. But we must be honest, as Europeans, and recognize that this type of abrasive and aggressive rhetoric has been met by part of some European leaders and some European elites with, let's say, deep-seated and prejudicial hostility towards President Trump and his administration. So I suggest that we must not be distracted by these personal clashes, these heated rhetoric, and instead focus on the practical things and the shared interests. So let's look, for example, the case of Greenland. Clearly, the United States cannot demand for territorial concessions by allies, but we must understand why they are so sensitive to the topic of defense and security of Greenland. It's not something new. It's not an invention by President Trump. We know that even President Truman back in 1946 tried to purchase Greenland from Denmark. So it's an old strategic issue for the United States. And in general, the United States are pushing and demanding to the European allies to take over a larger share of the burden for the common collective security. That's why for decades many NATO members, even including some of the wealthiest, have fell short from their commitment to meet the spending requirements that were agreed on by the alliance. So this current administration push for greater spending by the European allies shouldn't be perceived as an attack to Europe, but as a wake-up call for us. On energy and trade, many European governments today criticize the fact that the US administration is trying to find an agreement, a settlement with Russia, but it was actually Europe that in recent decades built a partnership with Russia which had left us dependent on Russian gas. And that was made against the advice from the United States. American tariffs have certainly strained trade in transatlantic trade, but this even quite limited impact should be weighed on to the self-inflicted damage by part of Europe that we have made to ourselves by offshoring some critical production and supply to countries like China. And speaking of values and democracy, some European leaders Bristol when Washington highlight the fact that there is some democratic backsliding in Europe, but the effects are troubling because we are witnessing this increasing pressure to censor social media. We have seen people prosecuted for online speech. We have seen major opposition parties treated like enemies of the state. We have seen elections cancelled or rerun. All those are very worrying trends that raise legitimate concerns, especially in the US, when they target conservative voices and movements that actually echo the priorities of the current US administration. And an alliance cannot thrive if one side perceives that the other is drifting away from the core shared values. Finally, it is worth noting that the current US administration is advancing a vision of NATO as a civilizational alliance. So not merely a military pact of convenience. And NATO has never been just a pact of convenience. If NATO is so successful, maybe the most successful alliance in history, because it's now 7 decades old, it's precisely because almost all of its members share this common cultural Western background and common ground. So tonight's event is hosted by the Machiavelli Foundation and the Heritage Foundation, two institutions deeply committed to the defense of the Western civilization, the Western values, to international cooperation that is respective of national sovereignty. And I think that this cooperation reflects a shared conviction that conservatives on both sides of the Atlantic have, in this moment, a unique responsibility to propose serious and workable solutions to the crisis of our civilization. So we are fortunate to have an outstanding panel to debate those topics. Paul McCarthy, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Honorable Deborah Bergamini, Member of the Parliament and Deputy Party Leader of Forza Italia, Daniele Capezzone, Chief Editor of Il Tempo. There is also Paolo Formentini, Member of the Parliament for Lega, and we will be joined as well by Senator Lavinia Mennuni for Fratelli d'Italia. We will conduct the debate in English, so please feel free to ask questions or intervene in English as well. And let's start from Paul. What is the state of transatlantic relations as seen from Washington? Some say that the Trump administration no longer cares about Europe and has its collective mind focused as well. Is it true?
Thank you, Daniele, and thank you for your partnership in organizing this panel and also your close cooperation with the Heritage Foundation. It's great to be with all of you. Thank you for coming out. This is a very timely topic and will continue to be a topic. And this leads me to the answer to your question, Daniele. Washington takes relations with Europe very, very seriously. But when I'm asked about the state of transatlantic relations, are they strong? Are they weak? My answer is always that transatlantic relations now are as strong as Europe is strong. So the Trump administration is expecting Europe to become stronger, and that will strengthen the transatlantic relationship. And it's not only on defense, but also, and I don't need to tell this audience about the need for greater defense spending, not only for your own territorial defense, but also your contributions to NATO. All European countries at varying speeds are working towards their contribution with the 5% as the target. In addition, strong economies are very, very important. Strong economic performance. We in Washington are very concerned about the state of the German economy, which until recently was the engine of the European economy, but clearly is not doing well. We believe that one of the problems with regard to economic growth is what we call at the Heritage Foundation the green transition madness. It has really hurt Europe's economic performance without going into individual countries. Overall economic performance in the euro area has been, with the exception of Poland, I would point out, has been rather underwhelming. And so America needs a good economic partner. So a good defense partner, a good economic partner. But when you read the national security strategy, and here I'll come to the third area, you need to take the Trump administration very seriously when it comes to what Daniele just brought up, which is the values aspect of this, and working together to strengthen, and some would say save, Western civilization, because it is under threat. And the national security strategy is really underlining that. And I would argue it's not only under threat in Europe, but also in America as well. We are facing a left which is becoming more violent, and the Democratic Party is increasingly being taken over by this very loud, increasingly violent faction on the left in the United States. And we need to fight for the importance of family, which is based on marriage of a man and a woman, and I'm not even going to say biological man and a woman. I'll just say a man and a woman, because I assume in this audience you know what a man and a woman are. However, there's some in the Democratic Party who really don't understand that. So if we start with that, we start with the basis of Western civilization as we know it. If we undermine the family, if we undermine faith, and atheistic forces, and in some cases paganistic forces are rising in the United States. I'll speak for my country right now. We really need to push back on those and get back to the basic values upon which we can strengthen and save Western civilization.
So now let's move to Daniele. By the way, Daniele Capezzone will have to leave early because he must, as the journalist said, he must put to bed the next day edition. But I want to ask you, Daniele, Europe undoubtedly bears its own share of responsibility in these strains. Has Europe done anything wrong or made specific choices that have complicated or strained the relationship with the United States?
First of all, thank you, Daniele. Thank you, Fondazione Machiavelli. Thank you, Heritage Foundation, for this invitation and for this opportunity to share ideas and views. We all know President Trump's flamboyant personality. And we all learned the blessed lesson by Professor Niall Ferguson that we should take him seriously, not literally. And as an unabashed Atlanticist, as a classical liberal, as a free marketeer, I know very well that sometimes President Trump will make us be in very high spirits, sometimes he will make us be in very low spirits. But you knew that a but was coming, of course, and a but has come, finally. But, from my perspective, we cannot, as Europeans, make three terrible mistakes. The first one, we cannot make President Trump the political scapegoat for our own failures and for our own impotence. Second, we cannot go on describing him in terms of anathema and superstition. There is this narrative which is disgusting. And third, we cannot forget our Western commitment. Please follow me for a couple of minutes, I won't be long. Let's mention some of the main political events of the last 2 decades. 2008, 2009, financial crisis, then Greek crisis, then migration crisis, then Brexit, then COVID crisis, then Middle East crisis, then Ukrainian crisis. In no one of these circumstances, and this is not President Trump's fault, of course, in no one of these circumstances, Europe has been able to play a positive and effective role. EU either was useless or was harmful sometimes. And what is even more surprising is that some of our Euromaniac friends, or Euro-enthusiast friends, to be more kind, they admit that something has gone wrong. Nevertheless, they say, please give us more of the same. This is a bit crazy and weird in terms of pure logic. It failed to work, but please give us more of the same. From my perspective, to be constructive, there might be, I'd like to say there should be, a new ground for common work between constructive Eurosceptics, among whom I am, and some realist Euro-enthusiasts. I strongly advise both of these 2 categories to read once again what Mrs. Margaret Thatcher presciently explained in a Bruges speech in 1988. 37 years have passed, but if you read that speech once again, it seems to have been thought and written 37 minutes ago. On the one hand, we have to do more things under the NATO umbrella. From my perspective, it wouldn't be wise to talk about a EU defense as something which might diverge from NATO. We need a greater commitment by single EU nations inside NATO. Second, we should reject the idea of a sort of European superstate design in Paris or somewhere else and then imposed to all of us. From my perspective as a Thatcherite, the EU should become, and this would mean a lot, not a little, a platform of services, offering programs and projects to those who want them, and it would allow each country to choose for itself the most suitable formula and degree of involvement, giving up excessive idea of political integration. Our Euro-enthusiast friends will say, but this is a project of Europe à la carte. Yes, my friends, there is no doubt about it from my perspective, and in a restaurant, it's always better to be able to freely choose among different courses rather than having a menu forced on you, especially by a French or German chef. Third point, in return for that, we should, smiling and being kind to him and being respectful to him, ask President Trump not to forget, as President Meloni told him when she paid a visit at the White House last spring, that to make America great again, you shouldn't forget to make once again the West great again. The world is a difficult place to live in, and the world is about to be even a more dangerous place to live in. And in spite of our faults, of the American faults, of the European faults, we both need good friends. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So I know that both Daniele Capezzone and also Senator Meloni are in a hurry because the Senate is in session. So just a final question, just a few words, Daniele. Do you believe that the current path of federalization undertaken by the European Union is irreversible, or is there a possibility of seeing Europe return to a form of cooperation that is mostly economic and more respectful of the national sovereignty of its member states?
From my perspective, we should go back to the European community idea. Do more things together from an economic point of view, giving up this crazy idea of an excessive political integration. When you go to buy a suit, if you are a very tall guy, if you are a very fat guy, if you are a very short guy, if you are a very thin guy, you won't be given a suit of the same size. It's just crazy to have the very same suit of the very same size for a German guy, for a Greek guy, for a Spanish guy, and so on. We need to work together if possible. We have to respect our differences and characteristics.
Thank you. Thank you also, Senator Meloni, for joining us. And for you, the classical $1 million question. What is the way to renew this transatlantic partnership now under strains?
Well, I was listening. Unfortunately, we have the session today, and so I'm a bit late. I'm very sorry for this, but I was listening to the last part about the necessity to make West great again, that I really think is very, very important. We have a system of values that is a shared system of values, and I think it is absolutely unshakable, and it needs to be nurtured. I heard President Trump, and he really put it so well when he said, United States and Italy, obviously I am mainly an Italian, have a bond that is rooted in the values that are timeless values for us. Faith, family, freedom, and our history is really binded if we think about Christopher Columbus and Amerigo Vespucci, who made the history of America with their discoveries, their achievements. If we think that America and United States especially have modeled their system of government looking at Athens, at Rome, especially at the Roman Senate, having the inspiration by wise and learned men that made that history, or the system of values and the idea of Aristotle's with the checks and balances, or if we think about the great influence of important Italian thinkers like Cesare Beccaria, who influenced Thomas Jefferson and such important aspects of the United States culture and identity, even some amendments of the Bill of Rights. So I really do think that there are some forces who seek to divide the two sides of the Atlantic, and we have to work, this is my idea, so that that does not happen. I think that this is essential to keep on having very good transatlantic relations.
Well, we know that the geopolitical landscape has changed a lot, and many people say that globalization has failed our countries and our societies. How do you think the West can concretely move forward?
First of all, I think that, as always, history is shaped by men. So it's important to have the right people at the right time in the right place, and I believe that our President Giorgia Meloni is the right person in the right time at the right place. And the very nice relationship that she has created, that President Trump and President Meloni have created, I think is an asset for transatlantic relations and for transatlantic affairs. Obviously, the United States can't continue being the policeman of the world. Everybody has to do their job. And I think that the European Union, also if it is actually drowning at the moment in bureaucracy, and it needs to be completely rethought, has to invest, obviously, in its defense. And I think that in this multipolar world that comes after, obviously, the idea of a globalization needs to have different areas. And our geopolitical area, the one in which Italy is, in the Mediterranean Sea, is very important. Because if we think about the enlarged Mediterranean, it stretches from the continent, obviously, and this means the Balkans, this means the Black Sea. It stretches to the north and the sub-Saharan belt of the African continent, from the Horn of Africa to the Gulf of Guinea. So this means from the Persian Gulf to the Atlantic coast. And I think Italy means to be central and to work for the safeguarding of the Mediterranean.
Thank you. So, Honorable Bergamini, with the Meloni government, Italy appears to be playing an increasingly active role in the Euro-Atlantic dynamics, often acting as a bridge builder between the United States and those European countries that are more critical of the Trump administration's approach. How would you describe the role that Italy can play in strengthening transatlantic relations?
Thank you very much. I'm really thankful to Fondazione Machiavelli and to my friend Dr. McCarthy for being here, Heritage Foundation, and all the colleagues. Thank you very much for being here. This is where Forza Italia meets every day for political meetings, so I consider this even an element of, also giving importance to us as a party of the actual coalition at the government of the country. Of course, Italy has always played a strategic and very relevant geopolitical role, not only because of its position within the enlarged Mediterranean Sea, but also thanks to a very special capability that Italy has always had, that of being a country always linked to pragmatism, no ideology, in dealing with geopolitical issues. Sometimes Italy has been criticized for this along history, but I've always thought that pragmatism, a non-ideological approach, is always very precious and sometimes the only one that can be applied to a growing complex geopolitical order or disorder or new order, which is the one we are all working towards. So Italy can be extremely relevant, and Italy is more relevant than ever now, which is something that I would like to underline. More relevant because of, for sure, of the great leadership expressed by our Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. More relevant thanks to the stability that the country is undergoing now, thanks to a truly democratically elected government, far, far away from past chemistries in building up unparalleled geometries of, political majorities that then lasted 6 months, 8 months, 1 year. This maybe will become, let's cross fingers, the longest government in the history of our republic. And stability, again, in geopolitical terms, is an incredible asset. More than that, Italy is playing a very relevant role within the European path. I'm not a Eurosceptic. I've always believed in European Union as the most visionary political architecture built in modern times. And like all visionary architectures, they are difficult to build up. They require time, imagination, and especially leadership. What I accuse Europe of having lost in the last decades is leadership, personal leaderships. The few leaders that have passed, like the founder of Forza Italia, Silvio Berlusconi, have been politically killed because of their leadership. Now I see that things are going better. We need leadership. And I consider President Trump for Europe and for Italy as well. Let's call it a Ruvit opportunity. And I've always thought that since the beginning. Trump can be a Ruvit, great helper of the quantic leap that Europe needs to do if it wants to stay alive. We cannot go back, I'm afraid. We can go forward, but we can choose to go forward in the right direction for the time being. A time of growing complexity, of growing competition, not only economic, digital, a very transformative moment. And I think that Europe can do that quantic leap, must do it. Come on, friends, it's not so bad. In UK now, there is a huge debate whether or not UK should get back to the European Union. Yeah, it's not very widespread, but it's a real debate, which means that maybe Europe is not that bad in the end. But of course, we need to do more. We need to express leadership. We need to, in my opinion, find the true political relevance and subjectivity of the European Union, which passes through a political evolution. And the political evolution, in my opinion, is to avoid, but this is the will of electors, to avoid this alchemy of socialists and populars having to rule the European Union together, which is, of course, a compromise solution that kills economy when it decides, with the Green Deal, to apply policies that are totally crazy for our industry, or that does the same for our agriculture, or that makes it impossible to build up a digital ecosystem in Europe capable of at least thinking of competing with the US or China. Artificial intelligence is the key issue, also a political one. Do we want an artificial intelligence system developed by a liberal democracy or by an autarkic state? This is the key question. I think we all want an artificial intelligence system that is built in the Western world, and that is the prominent one. So there are many things that have us together. Of course we need one Western world and not two. Two are losers, no matter which strength they have. And it is also true that in the last few decades, US and Europe have been drifting away. They have lost contact. I remember a number of years where there was no ambassador of the US in Italy, for example. It's symbolic, but still. So we have been drifting away. We have been losing sight one of the other. And this is why, with all the challenges that he's posing to us, President Trump is a Ruvit opportunity that we have to grab, for sure. I think, and this is the positive element that I see, that Europe now is ready to grab the opportunity. Yeah, we're still a little snob, and we're still undecided about, some aspects, but we are ready to grab the opportunity, and this is the good news. But if we grab the opportunity and then we waste the opportunity of building up a government of center-right in Europe, which means conservatives, and populace together, a coherent government that can speak in one language of coherent policies. If we don't grab that, maybe we'll waste some more time, and I'm afraid that we don't have that much. But I'm finishing. I think that what Italy is doing is an element of reference for the other European countries. I think that strategically, this new reinforcement of the political acts between Germany and Italy is a very relevant element for the future of Europe. And I really trust this political convergence of Merz and Meloni, of the government in Germany, although a government of compromise, let's underline that, and the government in Italy, can really define the new rules of Europe, because Merz and Meloni are two political leaders that are not afraid of expressing their leadership, so political, economical, and geopolitical. I think that also in the US, there will be some surprise in seeing how we evolve in the next months.
So many thanks also to Daniele Capezzone, who, as I said before, is leaving us. Thanks for your participation. Now I would like to get back to Paul. Since we are speaking about the future of Europe, the model of European unification and partnership, what do you think is the Trump administration's vision of Europe? Would it be acceptable for them to have a federal Europe, or would they prefer a return to an economic community model, or even the end of the European integration project altogether?
It's a very important question. It's one that I've written on quite a bit, and my colleague Daniele from Il Tempo, I think, hit it right on the head. The way we look at it from the Heritage Foundation is Europe, for the transatlantic relation to strengthen, Europe needs to get back to basics with regard to the European Union economic bases. And I think Margaret Thatcher, and here I'm speaking as someone who works in the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. I work in a center in the Heritage Foundation, which was created by Lady Thatcher in 2005, a bequest that she gave to Heritage, so you can imagine where I come from on these issues. But the quote that Daniele read from her biography is incredibly important. We are not supporters of increased federalization of Europe. We prefer to strengthen the sovereignty of nation states. We do not believe that it is good, and leaving aside whether it's Europe or any other part of the world, we don't think that a nation state should dissolve itself in a supranational institution. So we'll start with that premise. What that means for Europe, we have some ideas, but I think it's really up to European polities to negotiate this. I think the parties on the right in Europe, particularly conservative parties in ECR, and it's great to see our colleague from Fratelli d'Italia joining us here, that parties in ECR and also the parties in Patriots, and indeed the parties in EPP, will do well if they push for a decentralization of the Union over time. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about the specifics. If I could just add one thing, because I just had an article published in the National Interest in Washington, which focuses on two speeches that Polish President Nawrocki gave on this very topic, where he puts on the table some EU reform measures, very practical measures on voting, the EU Council presidency. You all follow these issues very closely. I think that's a start. But anything that's moving towards returning sovereignty to the nation state is something that we at Heritage support, and I believe the Trump administration supports as well.
So Well, Senator Meloni, I know that you most likely have to leave us soon, so maybe you want to make some comments on these remarks by the fellow panelists.
Well, I've actually been the rapporteur for the economic governance of the EU, of my budget commission in the Senate. And it is true that the European Commission is trying, without modifying the treaties, to go towards federalization. So this is actually happening at the moment. It is also happening in this precise period in which we are voting the economic financial framework. I am the rapporteur also of this particular very important dossier. And I do think that it isn't the right pathway, because it actually takes very important aspects away from the national governments that instead should be governed by the nations. We have had, for example, a great debate on the PAC, the agricultural economic, that is creating quite a few problems, especially to the nations that are on the Mediterranean Sea. There are some questions on bills, on new bills that are creating a few problems, and I really think that this is an aspect on which we will need to work quite hard in the next 3 or 4 months. So maybe we could organize a meeting on the financial framework of the EU.
Honorable Bergamini, recently Minister Crosetto, speaking in Washington, highlighted the serious issue of securing critical raw materials, and this is vital for Italy as it remains a major manufacturing power, but also essential for the necessary expansion of the defense industry and for keeping pace with technological advancements. How can the United States and Italy collaborate on this specific front?
Well, thank you very much. Last week, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Antonio Tajani, who's the party leader of my party, took part in a meeting about critical raw materials in DC. A very relevant meeting with Mark Rubio representing the government. And I think that one has been a clear proof of how U.S., Europe, Italy can work together concretely, pragmatically, and send some very clear geopolitical message to the countries that don't like liberty, freedom, and the Western world. It has been a very uncostly way of showing that the Western world is able to program, to face the challenges, and to work together. Of course, critical raw materials are a key issue because they can turn the Western world into a dependent entity, dependent on unfair and undemocratic countries, because only a few countries do own critical raw materials in an industrialized way. And of course, they want to build a dependence of the Western country on them. Together with artificial intelligence, I consider the critical raw materials issue one of the most strategic, most worrying, or more promising, if we are able to work together, subjects of the next world. We need to work together on raw materials because it's very costly to produce them. For example, Italy has a huge number of raw materials presence all over the country, but the investment needed to build up on them and to have these raw materials being produced is extremely costly. So we need to build up some synergy. We need to do together this kind of work. Otherwise, it won't be possible for a single country to build up a value chain that is sustainable at this moment of time when already raw materials are being produced and massive investments by China especially, not only China but mainly by China, are being made in Africa and all over the world. So this is an example of how and why we should work together. I'm a deep and close friend of sovereignty, being a classical liberal, as Daniele has defined himself. But there are some issues where either we work together in a coordinated way, and especially because raw materials concern also security, not only but mainly security, we need to define a way of becoming ourselves a value chain. Otherwise, we will spend time and money in developing national champions, but we're not sure that that will work. Of course, I refer to European countries that are much smaller than the US, but this is a critical point, and I very much welcome the fact that this sort of partnership is already being set up by US and European Union, and is already effective, and it's a clear message to those countries.
So before opening the Q&A session with the audience, I would like to give a final question to Paul, because some European leaders are wringing their hands and saying that the West is dead. However, the national security strategy of the United States explicitly calls for a strong West based on a civilizational alignment. How is this a basis for revitalizing the transatlantic relationship, and what must Europe do to make this work? So we have to...
Got it now. I answered this question in the response to your first question, which is when it comes, the way I described it is you have the defense commitments, you have the economic side of it, which is the trade relationship, and finally, and this is what the national security strategy focuses on, are the values, faith, family in particular. Strong families have to be the basis of rebuilding Western civilization. For us at Heritage, it's extremely important that families are based on marriage of a man and a woman. We are also a very strongly pro-life organization as well. We consider abortion to be an evil that needs to be wiped out eventually. So these are some of the values that we're talking about. But, and I think, Deborah, you brought this up, and I think it's a very important point that sometimes what defines a civilization is what we're against and the threats that we face. And Deborah and other speakers were absolutely correct in pointing out that Russia and China are a threat to Western civilization. Some conservatives would like to think that Russia is part of Western civilization. There are certainly aspects of it. But Russia is going to have to ultimately be a good partner for the United States and for Europe for that to work. Right now, our assessment at Heritage, because we haven't really talked about the Ukraine war, I follow Russia, Ukraine, and all aspects of that at Heritage. I'd be happy to answer any questions. But as it stands right now, Russia can't be a partner. It brutally attacked a neighbor. It's trying to grind it down. We understand the historical arguments by Russia that it needs a buffer zone to protect itself from the NATO alliance, et cetera, et cetera. We understand all that. But the way Russia is going about and has been going about, the way it runs its economy, where some reports say that 50% of GDP is now being spent on the military, this isn't a basis for cooperation with Russia. So as it stands right now, Russia and China are working very closely together, and we need to consider them an adversary. And what we need to focus on in strengthening the transatlantic alliance is the three areas that I mentioned, because I think that we have more that binds us than we have more in common than we have more indifference. And also, I would disagree with one thing you said, Deborah, with that we're not talking to each other. We are constantly talking with each other. A big part of my job, and my colleague Mario Ensler, who works with me on this, he works very closely with Heritage's president, Dr. Kevin Roberts, but also we work together on connecting with European delegations every week. We are constantly in communication with delegations from EPP, ECR, Patriots, officials from governments, defense committees, parliamentary committees constantly. So we are talking all the time. Our European colleagues may not like what they hear, but we need to keep talking. We need to be in communication, and that's going to be a big reason why Heritage continues to pay my salary.
No, but sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
I was referring to the past.
Yeah.
Not now. Now I think it's a golden moment for relations between U.S. and Europe. I know that the mainstream doesn't say so. They say, for example, and you can read it on the papers all the time, that Trump wants to destroy European Union. No, I don't believe this is true. And if you read all the strategic documents, you can obviously see that it's not true. It's a little bit of instrumentalization that it's always part of the political life. I believe that now we are talking, and talking a lot, and this is a very good change with respect to 15 years ago, let's say. And I also think that for Italy, this is a golden moment in relation with the US. Because I think that Trump is understanding Italy much better than previous presidents of the United States have understood Italy in its complexity. So, and this is why, sorry for this, but I just wanted to clarify, and this is why I believe that Italy will be so relevant for the future transatlantic relations. It's not only purely a matter of economics or politics, it's a psychological element that, of course, is always very relevant. And it looks like, compared to previous times, now Italy and US are much closer, even if in times of growing complexities, growing conflicts, and difficult, and polarization especially, a lot of polarization.
And a lot of credit for that, and it's already been mentioned, goes to Prime Minister Meloni.
Of course.
She has built a very strong
Trust.
connection and trust, yes, with Donald Trump himself and also his administration. So a lot of credit to her.
First of all, to thank very much the Heritage Foundation. I'm very, very pleased to be here, and the Machiavelli Foundation as well, because I really believe in what you believe. I am against abortion. I am convinced in the necessity to strengthen as much as possible our families and obviously the great roots of our Christian civilization. that was probably born here in this part of the world, but is now so strong in the United States, where there is this great, very well integrated Italian and American community. And so I really hope that we will be able to work as well as possible together. But unfortunately, I have to leave you, because today I didn't think about the fact that it's a Tuesday and it's a special day, a central day for the Italian Senate. I hope that we shall have the occasion to meet again. And so thank you really very, very much.
Come to Washington.
So I wonder if there is someone in the audience who wish to make a question. A couple, please.
I would like to make one.
Manuele, prendi il microfono.
My name is Jakub Korejba. I'm representing AVIM Center for Eurasian Studies based in Ankara, Turkey, but I'm from Poland myself, so I wouldn't like to miss asking Paul McCarthy about Central Eastern Europe. I have one comment and one question, if I may. At the very beginning of our meeting, Daniele mentioned that President Trump is looking for a deal with Russia. Well, this is something that we are very afraid of in Poland. It's not a abstractive question. It has a very practical meaning, especially for a person like myself who lives 80 kilometers from border with Ukraine and also Belarus. And you know, a deal with Russia is not something we need, because peaceful coexistence is only making Russia stronger, which is equal to more aggressive. We need an active containment. We need someone to do to Russia what Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan did to Soviet Union. We are realistic enough to understand that that Europe is not going to produce such a policy, and we are asking ourselves question whether US can do that once again. And the question is, do you think that Central Europe or Central Eastern Europe is a part of American sphere of influence or responsibility? If the question is yes, where does the border between American zone and Russian zone lie? Is Poland inside? Are Baltics inside? Is Ukraine inside, or a part of Ukraine? If the question is no, what should we do? What should happen to make US give us the sort of security guarantees that Western Europe, Japan, or South Korea have? Thank you.
Yes. Please collect also the second question. In the meantime, I invite Honorable Simone Billi to join us at the table.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniele, for the invitation once again. I'm Miguel Silva from the Transatlantic Institute in Portugal. It is an honor to be invited, Daniele, and it's nice to see you again, Paul, since Washington. We also had the pleasure of hosting the Heritage Foundation in Lisbon last year. The conversation so far has been very constructive. If you will allow me, I would like to make it more destructive. Because we have been discussing the EU, and I personally, of course, have written on the topic, but there are many Eurosceptics in the room, I would imagine. How can we reform Europe, or how can we make it return to a more variable geometry past, if Europe is made up of permanent bureaucracies, permanent technocracies that look after their interests and despise the interests of the nation states? I mean, this is a structural problem. It's not a policy problem. So this is going to remain as long as the European institutions remain. I don't see how their interests and our interests are possibly going to converge as long as there's a permanent European bureaucracy. And I would just take on the topic of Kevin Roberts' speech in Lisbon on USAID. Why do I mention USAID? Because as with the EU, it has sponsored extremist left-wing projects and organizations and NGOs in Europe, well, in the US as well, but in Europe. And these are the organizations that are destroying, that are lobbying our youth and our civil society and our media against the interests of the nation state, against sovereignty, against conservatism. How can we put an end to this? How can we cut the funding? And can there be cooperation? Has there been any investigations on USAID and EU funding for extremist organizations in Italy, for example? How can we cooperate on this matter and at least end this funding? I'm not even talking about constructing a funding for right-wing conservative organizations in the future, but at least cut the funding of extremist leftist NGOs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? So please, Paul.
Okay, on the questions that you asked, sir, are near and dear to my heart, particularly given fast-moving developments. Let's take a deal with Russia. Donald Trump wanted to make a deal with Russia, but I think he realized that Russia is very hard to make a deal with. Now there's a bit of stalemate going on with regard to that. But what is clear is an intent by the Trump administration to continue to provide, to allow Europe to buy weaponry from the United States through the Pearl program, as you all know, and send it to Ukraine. At the same time, putting pressure on Russia via sanctions. What you're not going to see is U.S. troops on the ground, although there are some think tanks in Washington who are arguing for this. There is almost zero support. Maybe a senator here and a member of Congress there, but there's almost no support for this. So that's just, that is simply not going to happen. So when you talk about a deal with Russia, we're going to continue. The most important thing for the administration right now is to bring the conflict to an end. And that is going to require meeting with and bringing together both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, as is happening right now. What I'm afraid of as an analyst following the conflict is that Russia still, although it's losing a terrible number of troops, they have the ability, and have always had the ability, as a student of Russian history, that's my academic background, they've always had the ability to absorb an enormous shock. Napoleon learned this, Hitler learned this, and so forth. So I see Russia's ability to continue to grind Ukraine down, and for Ukraine's sake, we need to come to a peace deal. How that happens, if we had 3 more hours, we could talk about it. I'm sure you're an expert on these matters, but that's essentially what we're focused on and what we support. In the meantime, give Ukraine what it needs to maintain the sovereignty that it has. I remember that I used that word again, sovereignty, while turning the screws on Russia. So that's the first question. And the second one, I'm sorry, jet lag.
Where is the border between
yes, Central Europe
influence and Russia?
Where is the border? Yeah, well, it kind of goes like this. It's kind of hard to. Certainly, to answer the question that you asked most directly, which is the United States sees kindred spirits in Central Europe. There's no doubt about that. Marco Rubio is going to be visiting after being here for the Winter Olympics in Milan. He's going to be visiting East European capitals. That's a signal. of support. Does it mean that we're only supporting Central Europe? I think there's an idea, and I'm actually a believer in this, is that there's more that joins us when we're talking about civilizational unity. There's more that joins us in Central and Eastern Europe, and I would include Italy in this as well. Why don't we think about a V12, or something like that, which is a more expansive group of countries which the United States sees eye to eye on, than say, and here I'll say it, and if there's a headline here, I doubt it, but France, Germany, the UK, which is becoming much more secular and losing those Western values because of a number of different things, but mostly because of just unbridled immigration into the country, plus a woke agenda which they simply can't get rid of.
So thank you, Paul. Now for the final remarks, I'll give the floor to Honorable Bergamini and then Honorable Simone Billi, who is the party whip and the Foreign Affairs Committee for Lega Party.
Okay, very shortly, thank you very much for your question. And well, I think that bureaucracy, and you asked about permanent European bureaucracy, and you're right, the adjective permanent is perfect. Any bureaucracy shouldn't be permanent. But bureaucracy develops and widens up when political leadership is weak. So our main fault, again, I started with that, is the fact that we killed political leadership for the sake of building up the architecture of the European Union. Now we need the leadership. And then there are rules that can be changed relatively easily. One is the unanimity vote. Unanimity kills any political process. I know we are not thinking in the same way even within our coalition here in Italy, but having been in the Council of Europe for almost 20 years now, which is another assembly, different, but a truly political one, I can say that, with unanimity, everything gets stuck. Also, the double presidency of the European Commission and the European Council, 2 presidents, 2 chairs. There is no sense. The leader of the European Union should be 1, not 2. So this could also help. And also, last but not least, I think that the peculiarity of the European Parliament not having any legislative independence or initiative possibility, that provides for bureaucracy to take broader and broader space. If the European Parliament would be a true parliament with legislative initiative, the relation between the executive power and the legislative power, of course, would be completely different. And European Union, could become more property of citizens rather than faraway bureaucrats, mostly hiding in comfortable offices in Brussels or Strasbourg. So these things could be done in order to give to almost 500 million European citizens the sense that Europe is changing towards them and not far from them. It wouldn't be enough, but certainly it would be a political sign, and it would also help European citizens to be more responsible when they do go and vote, and maybe avoid again these compromise governments that we are now living with and have been living with for such a long time. Regarding the propaganda, the extremist propaganda, I do agree with you. It just adds polarization to polarization, which is not easy to deal with when you are occupied, busy in realizing a huge political vision. Polarization is I think, the main danger in our brains before then into politics. So it's really something we should work together about, because if the Western world wants to stay a protagonist of the future, we should avoid polarization. We should turn back to intelligence and, analysis and in-depth reading of facts and reality. And that's a moral. I think it's a moral obligation, like safeguarding our Christian roots and our families and our faith and everything else. No polarization. Polarization makes us stupid and hapless. About funding, I don't know about that. I'm not a member of the European Parliament. I'm a member of the National Parliament. I'm not aware of that, but certainly there have been and there are many interferences in the building up of the minds of our younger generations. And this is something, together with demography, these two elements should be on top of a common agenda of the Western free countries.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you, Daniele, and thank you also for Centro Machiavelli and for the Heritage Foundation from the United States, and I saw also some other people from different countries in Europe. So thank you everybody for your presence here today, and please let me conclude with an additional suggestion to further develop this discussion, because transatlantic partnership are made by countries, and countries are made by people. And in the United States lives about 500,000 of Italians now. 500,000 of Italians, let's say, regularly living in the United States. Maybe there are some other people just, let's say, coming and maybe back in Italy for a few time. So 500,000 of people really living, working, and developing their life in your country. So this is one of the biggest bridge between us, between our countries, between Italy and the United States. It's a bridge made of people, bridge made of culture, of history, personal history, national history as well. I know a lot of people that went in the United States before Second World War, in the 50 and in the 60. I know also newborn in the United States, so people with 20, 30 years old born in the United States. I know also youngest people coming from Italy in the United States just to improve their skills, improve their life, contribute to the growth of the United States with their job, with their skills. So this is a very powerful tool that we can use, let's say both, we as Italian and you as US people. Both we can use this powerful tool in this time. As you already know, you already discussed about this time in let's say geopolitical situation, so how we can say, so developing, let's say, so changing very, very quickly from technical point of view. So I'm thinking about artificial intelligence, and also, as you discussed a few minutes ago, also from a social and economic point of view as well. And Western countries, so the transatlantic countries, now are challenging with this big, let's say, I would say fight, but it's an economic and social fight. So we need to work together just to improve our life, our economy, Italian, United States, all transatlantic countries, improve the economy, improve the social, improve the real life of a single person, of a single people as well, in a world that is changing very fast. And we need to improve our life in a good way also for the other countries outside the transatlantic relationship. We need to try to work together, maybe also with China. China, for sure, it's our biggest competitor. I mean Italian, European, and the United States as well, biggest competitor. Very strong and say very, very heavy competitor. But also we need to work together with them. We cannot close all the door completely. We need to work with them and try to do all the best to have our economic and social relationship with them as better as possible. So hopefully from my side is that we will be able to work always much better together also with them to improve our life. And with our life now, I intend not only Italian, European, and the United States, but also Chinese life. We need to try to work together to improve the life of the people in the world as better as possible. For sure, the transatlantic countries are a single block, hopefully strongest in the future, that needs to work together to try to, let's say, work much better also with China, but we need to work together. And our Italian community in the United States can do this, can make stronger our relationship, can make stronger our economy, can make stronger our society. So hopefully we will be able to work much better together, Italian, European, United States, in the future, much more than now. So for me, that's all for the moment, and thank you again for your availability today.
So that's all for tonight. Thanks to all our panelists and the audience for participating.